Hello, everyone. My name is Stacey Moran, and I'm the Program Policy and Resource Manager at Groundwork USA. Thank you for joining us today at this Groundwork USA webinar on starting a Groundwork Trust in your community. Today I'm joined by Groundwork USA's Executive Director, Steve Burrington, our Communications Manager, Liz Carver, and our Program Manager Partner at the National Park Service, Doug Evans. You'll be hearing from Steve in just a minute, but before we begin, I have a few housekeeping notes for you. The first is that today's webinar is being recorded, so you'll be able to access it for future reference. In the next couple days, we'll email you the link to the recorded webinar along with a PDF of today's presentation. There will also be available on Groundwork USA's website. We'll be muting all lines during Steve's presentation to avoid some background noise, so please save your questions for the Q&A that will follow the presentation. There are a couple ways that you can submit questions. The first way is through the chat feature. You should see a chat icon in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. If you have questions or comments during Steve's presentation, please type in the chat box area, and we'll address them at the end of the webinar. You can also raise your hand by clicking the Raise Hand button or icon at the bottom of your screen. During the question and answer section, we'll unmute your line so you can ask your question or comment. And with that, I'll hand it over to Steve Burrington, Groundwork USA's Executive Director.
Thank you, Stacey. It's a pleasure. Greetings, everyone. It's a pleasure to be able to connect with people from so many different communities around the U.S. today. I'll begin by providing an introduction to the Groundwork Network and what it does, and then walk through the process of creating a new Groundwork organization. So Groundwork USA is the only network of local organizations that are devoted to ensuring that everyone has a healthy, green, resilient neighborhood environment and access to the opportunities that go along with that. The local Groundwork organizations work exclusively in low and moderate income neighborhoods. And we are a bit of an odd duck. We are a national enterprise with local roots. And so in a world where there are national organizations that sometimes open offices in cities around the country, and then there are local organizations that are typically on their own, figuring things out by themselves. We are a network, and we're a fairly closely knit network. The local roots are strong. The network is still compact enough that there's a high degree of intimacy and peer learning and sharing. Our mission is not just to create great places, but to do it through meaningful community engagement and collaboration. So the projects and the collaboration and the relationships that go along with making them happen are equally important. Our network currently includes 20 local organizations around the country. Another is in the works in Mobile, Alabama. And the local Groundwork Trusts are linked to a national support organization, Groundwork USA. Groundwork USA staff are based primarily in offices of local Groundwork Trusts, and several of them have previously worked for local Groundwork organizations. So the National Support Organization is well versed in the work at the local level, and we pride ourselves on really meaningful integration of work at the national level and work in local communities. The programs and projects of the network are diverse, but they're based on a common underlying culture and set of values. Certainly, first and foremost is equity, access for everyone to opportunity, and health and well-being, a commitment to addressing economic inequality and legacies of racial injustice. There's a common, of course, focus across our network on green, healthy, and resilient neighborhoods, essentially everything outside your front door is fair game for local groundwork organizations. We are about leading by doing. There's a certain amount of advocacy embedded in the work, but the groundwork community is very much a community of doers. It's not about pounding up on somebody else to do the job. It's about rolling up sleeves and enlisting more people in the work. It's about investing in people and in place, and our tagline, changing places, changing lives, is lived and breathed by everyone around the network on a daily basis. And as I mentioned previously, Groundwork is a hallmark of everything it does is meaningful community engagement and collaboration. Everyone with the idea that everyone in the community has a role to play in lifting up places that are challenged. We strive for the best of both worlds. The local groundwork organizations have access to national resources, including expertise, funding opportunities, peers facing similar challenges in other communities, and a growing portfolio of youth programs that are run by Groundwork USA, along with very serious local roots. And by local roots, what I mean is really that the groundwork organizations become the go-to places for people from many walks of life who want to participate actively in lifting up their communities, people who want to achieve tangible results by working with others in an inclusive effort. And the work involves short-term projects and gains and much longer-term efforts that really do prove transformative over time, as I'll discuss in a moment. The groundwork model, although there is commonality in how we approach and in the culture we share, provides a framework for local innovation and pursuit of local priorities. So while there are common program threads across our network, every local groundwork organization is doing something that no one else in the network is doing. So on the slide on your screen right now, on the right-hand side is the science barge of Groundwork Hudson Valley, based in Yonkers, New York, on the Hudson River. The science barge is a hydroponic farm powered entirely by renewable energy. It is an amazing educational resource. It's visited and used by thousands of residents and school children every year. On the left-hand side is an interesting trash collection technology, a band-along river trap that Groundwork DC, Groundwork District of Columbia, has installed and maintains on tributaries of the Anacostia River in Washington, D.C. So everyone who sees the science barge wants to have a science barge in their community. But each Groundwork Trust has its own story too about something that it's done that nobody else has done anywhere yet in the network yet. But the work is all informed by best practices tailored to local circumstances, leverages existing assets, opportunities that exist in the particular place, and again, driven by really serious community engagement and broad collaboration. The major program areas that you'll find across the network involve sort of equitable development and redevelopment, healthy communities, which spans a range of things, including conversion of brownfields into parks and greenways, farming and community gardening, urban forestry, walking and bicycling infrastructure, transforming brownfields, vacant and blighted properties is something that is kind of at the core of what our network does. Revitalizing urban waterways, we have an impressive track record of bringing back really badly damaged urban rivers and streams, and increasingly working on green infrastructure and taking watershed-type approaches throughout our communities. And embedded in all of the local groundwork organizations are youth development programs, which really are very special and transformative. I think by virtue of the fact that they are not standalone youth programs, but they are integrated into the work of the groundwork organizations and provide very special opportunities by virtue of that fact. The Groundwork Network now goes back about 20 years in the United States. It has a very impressive overall track record in the communities where groundwork has been active longest. Really transformative results have been achieved. And we have been growing steadily in our ability to measure and to report results. We are increasingly adopting best practices in evaluation and improving our ability to show the world what's being accomplished and why it matters. Where did we begin? The Groundwork USA Network has its origins in the 1990s and in the era when the environmental justice and brownfields revitalization efforts got underway nationally. A team led by the National Park Service and the EPA Brownfields program was seeking a model for community engagement in improving places affected by disinvestment and by brownfields, and found that model in the United Kingdom, in Groundwork UK, which was a network with which we share the logo and tagline. Groundwork UK got underway in the early 1980s when many post-industrial communities in Britain were facing the closure of traditional industries and some really brutal economic challenges. The term trust is where it reflects our origins in the Groundwork UK model. Some of the local groundwork organizations are land trusts or affiliated with urban land trusts, but most of them are not. Trust speaks to the value we place on trusting relationships across people from different walks of life in our communities, and it also reflects our origins in the Groundwork UK network. The EPA National Park Service partnership has continued and has expanded for 20 years. It is, I think, distinctive in being a federal interagency partnership, which has a laser-like focus on work in communities around the country, on tangible results. It provides a way for the federal agencies to advance work on the ground all over the country in ways that they wouldn't be able to otherwise. And our relationships with EPA and the Park Service are of enormous value to the local groundwork organizations. At EPA, the relationship now extends to the Office of Water, and we also work closely with the Office of Environmental Justice and the Office of Sustainable Communities. Our relationships with the Park Service extend to other national offices, in addition to the Recreational Trails and Conservation Assistance Program, where our partnership began, and then also extending to many, many units of the National Park System around the country. So before turning to the process of creating a new groundwork organization, I want to say a few words about something that has come to the fore since the Groundwork Network was created 20 years ago, which is the challenge presented by growing inequality in the U.S., the challenge presented by the fact that just too many people are being left out of our nation's prosperity. Equitable development or redevelopment is an overarching goal of the Groundwork Network. And a couple of years ago, the network came up with the following sort of principles of equitable development, which are as follows: that everyone in the community should benefit from development, that in places, urban communities and other communities that are revitalizing, those who have been living in the communities through the hard times should not be displaced and should share in today's and tomorrow's prosperity, that the community should be involved in defining what is a benefit to the community, and that asset-based planning, focusing on the strengths and the resources, the people and other resources that even a stressed community has, is an important way to go about the work. There's a culture of mutual accountability, building trusting relationships involving the public and private sectors, and often between people who have not worked together previously. Again, I guess I say it on with nearly every slide, the effort is very much about collaborative, inclusive community engagement, and about finding common ground, balancing different priorities, recognizing the realities that regulators and developers face, along with the realities that people who are not part of their world face. And importantly, there really is no finish line. There is no time when the job is done. The oldest Groundwork USA trusts have been working for 20 years now and have really made enormous differences in their communities. But in each of those communities, no one would say the work is done. Each era unveils new opportunities and new challenges. So I'll now turn to the process of establishing a new Groundwork Trust. How does this happen? There are basically 6 steps. Some of these steps are actually phases, which I will walk through now. It begins with formation locally of a steering committee, submission of a letter of interest to Groundwork USA, which is then reviewed by a working group, as I'll describe in a moment, a site visit by communities that are selected for that, a full proposal from communities who are invited to submit one, and then a feasibility study, which is really a planning process, and a vote by the local committee to proceed with launching the new organization, and then the launching phase, the startup phase of the new Groundwork organization. So the steering committee. What goes on at this point, and what does our committee look for in a local steering committee? Certainly, above all, it needs to be representative of the community. It needs to be inclusive and reflect people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different walks of life, reflect the racial and socioeconomic diversity of the community. And those who come together need to be prepared to commit to a 6-month process of planning what a new Groundwork organization would do and how it would look, how it would fit in, fill gaps. And the local the people who are collaborating on this agree among themselves on ground rules for participation. We at Groundwork USA do not dictate particular ways of operating at this stage. What we do look for is a shared commitment to pursuing near and long-term changes in the community, and a sincere interest in really pulling together for the long haul. The initial work of the steering committee culminates in a letter of interest, which describes how the steering committee's ideas and how Groundwork could take root in the community. So the letter of interest is a 4- to 5-page letter. The requirements for it are set out in detail in the request for proposals that you can find on the Groundwork USA website. We ask for an overview of the demographics of the community, its environmental and economic and community development challenges, a demonstration of interest in taking on these challenges that exist in the community as well as among the major stakeholders who are part of the committee. The opportunities, tangible opportunities that a new trust can pursue, both in the near term and the long term. We look for a lead organization and contact person who we can coordinate with, communicate with during the early steps. We look for an ability to leverage local funding support, municipal, private, in-kind, corporate, foundation, whatever. And we look for an account of what has gone on with past funding or technical assistance from EPA, particularly the EPA Brownfields program, from the National Park Service Recreational Trails and Conservation Assistance Program, and or Groundwork USA. Groundwork USA leads technical assistance programs in equitable development for communities with brownfields, and all of the partners in the National Groundwork USA Partnership, EPA, the Park Service, and Groundwork USA have worked with communities beyond the network in the past, and we're very interested in what has happened in any of those prior engagements. And then, what is the potential for Groundwork to create, improve, engage the community in stewardship of parks, greenways, urban gardens, urban farms, to stimulate local economic revitalization that benefits all segments of the community, particularly those who face challenges, people who are experiencing barriers to employment, people who have been left out of prosperity in the past. How will Groundwork build local capacity to take on the 3 E's, environment, economy, equity? And how will the local organization engage stakeholders in planning and carrying out projects, programs, and partnerships? So following review by the selection committee of the letters of interest, we arranged site visits with a subset of communities who have submitted letters of interest. And basically what we are looking for is the reality behind the letter of interest. Who are the people? What is the passion that's driving them? What is the vision? Why Groundwork? Why now? And why here? What's the nature of the need? And is there energy and a set of working relationships, either existing and or in the making, that can really make transformative change happen? After the site visit, we request a small number of communities to submit a full proposals, which essentially more fully develop the ideas in the letters of interest, expand on them, discuss the roles of key partners, get more specific about some of the low-hanging fruit, the early projects that would build momentum and expand involvement in the community. We look for big ideas or visions that the Trust would champion, something that would be pursued over a period of time and be felt to be really transformative in the community. We also look for firm commitments of financial support and overall backing from the chief local official, city manager, mayor, whoever the highest ranking local official is. It is a requirement to pursue, to proceed to the next step, that the local government entity provide a local match of at least $35,000 a year for each of the first 3 years. It is also a requirement that there be a private sector financial commitment of at least $10,000 a year for 3 years. And these are matches to the financial support provided through Groundwork USA by the federal partner agencies, which I'll describe in a moment. After the committee, the Groundwork USA committee has reviewed the full proposals, we, in the case of this year, will select one community to proceed with a full planning study, the feasibility study. And this is where things get really serious. It is typically a 6-month process, maybe more, maybe less, but we like to keep it on a reasonably fast track to help maintain momentum. And it is supported by Groundwork USA and by National Park Service staff who work with the steering committee. And we provide up to $5,000 to engage a local project consultant to staff the local steering committee and help move things along at the local level. Groundwork USA and National Park Service staff typically will visit 5 to 6 times during the course of this process to help move things along, and with the local coordinator take the lead in writing up the feasibility study, which is a blueprint for the new Groundwork organization. And the feasibility study goes more deeply into the needs of the community, opportunities that are there, what the priorities of the new Groundwork Trust would be, getting specific about projects, programs, the relationships, the partnerships that would be involved. During the course of the feasibility study, there will be a lot of sort of meet and greet meetings to build relationships and gain commitments from potential funders, community foundations, potential corporate supporters, and so on. There is also a lot of thought given to how the local Groundwork organization will nest among the organizations that are already at work in the community. Our investment in creating a new Groundwork organization always needs to take place in a situation where there really is a gap to be filled, where there is a consensus locally among partners that a new organization needs to exist. If there is a sense that everything needs to be done, could be done by pre-existing local entities, it's probably not the right place for a new Groundwork organization, but it is, I guess, in a sense, surprising that in so many places where feasibility studies are pursued, there really is a strong perceived need for an organization that will tackle the whole community environment, that will work on the things beyond affordable housing, beyond jobs and whatnot, that involve taking a holistic look at what the community is like as a place to live, particularly for sort of the disadvantaged parts of the community. And then at the end of the feasibility study process, there is a up or down vote from the steering committee as to whether it wants to proceed in creating the new Groundwork Trust. The creation of a new Groundwork Trust then needs to be approved by the Groundwork USA board and also have the concurrence of the National Park Service and EPA. Which brings us to the launching phase, which is really the startup phase in for the new Groundwork organization. It begins after the necessary approvals have been provided locally and nationally. It starts typically with a launch event, which kicks off the new organization for a broader audience in the community, and the new trust signs a memorandum of understanding with Groundwork USA and commits to milestones in organizational development over roughly a 3-year period. The framework for the launching phase is as described on the slide in front of you. Seed funding is provided by the National Park Service and EPA through Groundwork USA in the amount of $190,000, which is dispersed over 3 to 4 years, with approximately half of that being made available in the first year to get things going. The balance of $100,000, subject of course to federal budgeting processes and so on, is released over 3 years in annual increments of $25,000 to $50,000. I'm sure many of you are wondering at this point, what does this mean in an era, in the current era and the current federal policy and budgeting framework? Although the funds in the out years are subject to availability, we don't begin this process without having commitments that we are confident we will be able to follow through on in the out years. The vehicle for providing the funding is what's called a task agreement between the Groundwork USA and the National Park Service, which specifies the deliverables, the organization building activities, and the outcomes of those that will emerge. The funding is then flowed from the National Park Service through Groundwork USA to the local organization. There's a fiduciary fiscal sponsorship agreement between Groundwork USA and the new Groundwork Trust. Those of you who know about nonprofit law know that the Internal Revenue Service needs to provide nonprofit status for a 501c3 organization, and that takes a number of months to take place. And during that time, Groundwork USA is the so-called fiscal sponsor of the new Groundwork entity. During this, those are the formalities. During this phase, I would say there is, in a sense, even more importantly, a lot of help and support and a lot of interaction between Groundwork USA staff and, to some extent, peers in other Groundwork organizations and the new Groundwork Trust. It's a significant investment for Groundwork USA and its federal partners, and in a sense, the rest of our network to get a new Groundwork organization going. We consider ourselves to have a big stake in the new trust success, and so we are as hands-on as will be helpful. The local organization is indeed a local organization with autonomy and in charge of its own destiny, but we are there to provide as much support as we can, and Groundwork USA's support has grown in quantum and in the forms that it takes significantly over recent years, and we certainly hope that will continue. So the next steps in the process that hopefully many or most of you on the webinar today will be participating in are as follows. Letters of interest are due by April 30 of this year. That deadline is firm. Notifications of selection for site visits will go out about 2 weeks later, around May 15. And then site visits will take place between mid-May and mid-July. By which point we will request full proposals from some subset of communities, and we anticipate that the due date for submitting full proposals will be September 15 of this year. We will then, after review of those, be notifying the communities of who has been selected to launch a new groundwork organization and receive the financial and other support that is entailed around October 15. And we expect then that the feasibility study process will begin by December. In conclusion, as I hope is clear by now, this really is a unique opportunity for people to come together and participate in improving their community. It's not just about sitting in meetings, looking at presentations, raising money, creating and growing a groundwork organization. It involves all that, but it also means really rolling up sleeves, getting to work in many other ways, engaging on improving the community in a way that many people can take part in, and take part in ways that are fun and personally rewarding, and that for many of the youth and others involved contribute very significantly to a sense of empowerment and opportunity and direction in life. I have not dwelled on it today, but what happens in the Groundwork youth programs to the usually teens who are involved, sometimes older folks, is really quite wonderful, and we are very, very proud of the growing number of young people, typically in their 20s now, who have come through the Groundwork Green teams, who have participated in making their communities better places, and are now moving on to other accomplishments in life. And as I said earlier, the creation of a Groundwork organization really does mean building new relationships and having people who may have not had a chance to collaborate on anything in the past work on, find common ground, and carry out good ideas and great visions that they come up with together. So I will close with that and just say what a wonderful collection of people the Groundwork organization, the Groundwork Network represents. We have a really quite a special national community, and we very much look forward to having discussions with many of you about joining it. With that, I will turn it back to Stacy Moran.
Great, thanks, Dave. So we've come to the question and answer portion of our webinar, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Liz Carver. She'll start by sharing some of the questions you've all submitted through the chat box during the webinar. If you have questions or comments that come up as we move through this section, please feel free to type them in the chat box at the bottom of your screen, or click the raise hand button or icon to let us know that you'd like us to unmute your line so you can ask your question.
Great, thanks, Stacy. So yes, please send in your questions. We've got a few already, and I'll address these to Steve. So Steve, can you speak to the different governance models in use throughout the Groundwork Network? Are municipalities typically involved? And if so, what kinds of offices or divisions?
Typically, people from the municipal government certainly participate very actively in the steering committees, and do continue to participate on the boards of directors of the Groundwork organizations as time goes on. The relationship between Groundwork organizations and their local governments beyond those basics is very complex and takes a lot of different forms. There is very significant collaboration, certainly on major projects in different communities, There are places where the groundwork organizations formally become the builders as well as the planners of parks or other new community assets. There, in many places, the groundwork organizations' youth programs, the Green Team programs, are supported by local government and involve collaboration with workforce investment boards or with other parts of local government. The points of contact in local government, I would say, vary a fair amount. And it's tough to generalize about that, but the mayor's offices, planning departments, parks departments, community development departments, departments of public works are, I guess, the most common lead partners for local government with the groundwork organizations.
Great, thank you. Another question has come in about how often do steering committees meet prior to submitting the letter of interest?
There are typically, I would say roughly monthly big and sort of intense meetings where a representative of Groundwork USA is present for the day or two. There is a lot of back and forth and small group meetings and outreach meetings and so on that go on during the course of the process. I won't venture to put a number on it, but I think that, as I say, it's probably typical for a major meeting of the whole committee with representatives from Groundwork USA and the other partners to take place about once a month, and then for a handful of smaller meetings to take place each month along the way.
Great. Okay, so here's a question from a participant who's from a community in Massachusetts who notes that the Northeast currently has the highest density of groundwork organizations. When choosing a potential future community, how much weight will be put on geography?
Well, the first thing I would say about Massachusetts in particular is that the existing groundwork organizations in Massachusetts are in the process of developing a common framework among themselves, and so there are possibilities for expansion within Massachusetts outside of this process. And I think probably the first thing for somebody in Massachusetts to do would be to connect with us about having a conversation with Groundwork Lawrence and representatives of the other organizations. We, I would say, are interested in geographic diversity, but overwhelmingly what we respond to is the spark of potential, in a particular place. So we are prepared to be captivated by the energy and breadth of participation and and good ideas and promise of a local steering committee wherever it may be.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I should just note, if people who have asked questions have follow-up questions, feel free to type them, or again, just raise your hand and I can unmute your mic. So Steve, a question about the sponsor for a potential Groundwork Trust. Does it need to be a 501c3, or could it be a local development corporation, 501c4, possibly a not-for-profit?
The initial sort of lead organization, although there's not always a sort of dominant organization, there is typically somebody in the lead. Really could be it could be virtually anyone. We are completely open-minded and are interested in the attributes, the relationships, the capabilities that somebody brings rather than their particular structure. All of the once the new Groundwork organization is created, it has historically always been a 501c3, although we are open-minded. I think any Groundwork organization would need to have the ability to receive tax-exempt, contribute foundation grants, individual donations, and so on. We are subject to that, in the questions about, financial sustainability and so on that would be raised. I think we are open to different legal structures. We have not encountered that question in real life to date.
Okay, thank you. We have several questions about different aspects of funding for Groundwork Trust. One is sort of early on regarding the $35,000 a year local government commitment. Can that be in the form of federal grant funds?
If Doug Evans is on the line, he should speak to that. He may no longer be. Doug, are you still there?
I think Doug. Yes, I am.
Okay.
Would you like question, to speak to that? People have used community development block grant funding before, but they cannot use EPA funding or Park Service funding for the match.
Community development block grant funding, I think, formally for these purposes is local government, or in some cases state government funding. So that's the reason for that.
Okay. Another funding question: are local trusts on their own to find funding after the initial 3 to 4 years?
By and large, yes. Although Groundwork USA provides a certain amount of coaching and support. We are able to access each year more national foundation funding and more funding from federal agencies and elsewhere. The total amount of funding that we are able to provide the trusts grows significantly each year, but at the same time, it will never add up to more than a small portion of an individual Groundwork Trust's budget.
Okay. Here's an operational question about Groundwork Trust. Is it typical for a local Groundwork Trust to need to hire full-time staff to manage the organization and projects, or are all of the tasks associated with management handled cooperatively with existing staff?
Existing staff of...
I would maybe ask the questioner to, I can unmute your mic and you might be able to tell us. I think there's a reference to Groundwork USA existing staff.
Yeah, I think I need clarification of the question.
Sure. Andrew, if you're there, would you like to clarify?
Yeah, so existing staff that are working for the agencies that are leading the effort or part of the steering committee. Typically, do you see new staff being brought on?
Yes, and that really is essential, and it's reflected in the benchmarks that have been developed, the milestones for progress of the organization. It's certainly if there can be dedicated portions of staff from existing organizations and agencies, that would be helpful, but I don't think it's viable to a Groundwork organization would not be viable without its own staff.
Thanks.
Sure. This is a different question about sort of a Groundwork structure, the structure of a trust, but would Groundwork fund a cooperative, or does the structure need to be a nonprofit 501c3 organization?
We would have. I I don't know the answer to that. We have not encountered that question, and it would raise some issues, but we would look at it with an open mind, and if that could work, we'd be we'd be willing to try something new.
Great. Okay. I have a question from a caller calling from Lima, Peru, saying that she would love to start a groundwork organization in Lima, and would that be possible, or who should she talk to about that?
Well, this process is supported by U.S. federal government agencies, and really only can support the creation of new groundwork organizations within the United States. But perhaps we could talk offline about exploring possibilities elsewhere. Our ability to provide support might be limited, but many people from our organizations do have relationships and family histories and whatnot in Latin America, and there may be ways that we could provide advice and support.
Great. And we have a question from a caller, Natalie Augusto-Filion. I'm going to unmute your mic, and if you want to go ahead and please ask your question. Okay, well, if Natalie is on the call, go ahead and please ask your question, and otherwise we'll move on, take another question, and we can come back to you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Great.
Okay, apologies. I had 3 different mute options here. My question has to do with, I think because the conversation to move forward a Groundwork Trust or creating a steering committee locally can really be pretty big and visionary. It strikes me that at least in my community, we would want sort of more lead time before getting to the point of submitting a letter of interest. And I'm curious whether there's any opportunities for having, a little bit of a back and forth from a Groundworks USA staff person, if I were to convene sort of an exploratory meeting with local partners to just gauge interest. Because I think if we're, gathering people to get to the point of submitting an LOI, there's certainly not enough time for this year to really get into that in a way that is truly inclusive. I think there's a lot of partners that we would potentially want to try and engage and have at the table here.
Yes, historically, this process has unfolded on roughly an annual basis, and our goal and the goal of our federal partners is to do it on a more regular annual basis in the future. We recently had a gap because in 2013 we actually initiated the start of 4 new groundwork organizations, and we, frankly, it took us about 3-4 years to process all that. But barring unfortunate developments, we would be moving through this process again a year from now, and would be glad to work with you in the meantime. It is possible also that we could support what you're doing through our Equitable Development Technical Assistance Program, which Kate O'Brien, our Director of Capacity Building, leads. We are funded to help build capacity in communities with brownfields, and might be able to put more significant time and effort into supporting you through that.
Awesome. I'd love to hear more about that. Is that someone, would I follow up with Stacy on that?
Yes.
Of the emails on the screen? Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Great. Thanks so much for your question. Steve, we have a question about a scenario where, in terms of the letter of support, where community's mayor might be supportive, but the parks director might drag his heels on collaborative ventures. So the caller's wondering, would that rule the city out from consideration?
No, I think not, and I would say that certainly if the chief elected official is supportive and is prepared to make the financial commitment, and if there's elsewhere in City Hall a an interest in helping the Groundwork Trust take root in the community, that's what we'd be looking for. I think that it is not uncommon for the parks departments, which unfortunately have become so stressed and so skinny down, to be very conservative about anything that would increase the burdens on them. And so it is not necessarily a new experience in our network, I think, to have the Parks Department in a somewhat defensive posture. So it's not an entirely new phenomenon, and would by no means be a deal killer from our point of view.
Okay, great. That's great to know. Thank you, everyone. These are really great questions. And another question about what the typical Groundwork Trust budget would be following the startup years. We have milestones that contemplate having the Groundwork Trust achieve a budget of $250,000 or more by its third year. Through a process with our network, we developed a set of sort of sustainability thresholds for new organizations, and concluded that that is the minimal level that is needed financially to have a viable groundwork organization going and accomplishing something in the community. In the out years, although their growth is not always even or on a straight line, the Groundwork Trusts tend to develop budgets that are anywhere between about $500,000 and close to $3 million. I would say just in the last 2 years. We are a fairly new network. Many of our organizations are new, so just in the last 2 years, there's been significant growth in the budget of the typical groundwork organization. So, I would say it's hazardous to generalize, but I would say that most of the groundwork organizations are on a path toward budgets that are in the the $1 million plus range after a number of years. Okay, great. And then just a quick follow-up question regarding the community development block grant funding that was referenced earlier. Who is that from? Does that come from HUD, or what agency would
it originates with HUD, and it flows directly from HUD to municipalities above a certain threshold. It's something like a population of 45,000. And then for smaller communities, the money flows from HUD, I believe in all states, through state housing and community development agencies.
Okay, great. And I know we're right at 4. We have one more question, and that is generally on what level are groundwork organizations operating? Neighborhood, city or town, region?
That's an excellent question. Quite a few of them are in sort of mid-sized cities, ranging with populations from, say, 75,000 to maybe 200,000, and typically they have a scope that is citywide or that extends even into adjacent communities at that size. In larger metropolitan areas such as Denver, Washington, D.C., I guess those two are the prime examples. The groundwork organizations typically operate in the lower income neighborhoods throughout the city, and sometimes in adjacent municipalities.
Sure. And just as a follow-up to that, what's the smallest community involved as a groundwork organization? We're hearing from one community of 20,000 people. Is there a groundwork organization for small communities?
A community with a population that size, I think, does have some special challenges in terms of having, sort of critical mass to, sustain a groundwork organization over time. Although, we are certainly well aware of the needs of smaller communities around the country and receptive to the idea of helping make it work in a community that size. I believe that the current Groundwork community with the smallest population may still be Lawrence, Massachusetts, which has a population of 70-some thousand.
Okay. Yeah. No, we did have a follow-up question about, could you imagine a Groundwork program succeeding in a community of 1,000 people, even much smaller than that?
I think that would present some pretty serious challenges just in terms of sustaining with the human energy and mustering the overall capacity. A community with a single-digit population single-digit thousands, I think would probably need to look at its surrounding area and think of achieving critical mass by having a somewhat broader geographic scope.
Great. Thank you all for your questions and time today. If there should be any other questions that come up in the meantime, please do not hesitate to either contact myself, Stacey Moran, or Doug Evans at the contact information provided on the screen in front of you. As a reminder, today's webinar was recorded and will be emailed to you along with a PDF of the presentation in the next couple days. It will also be accessible on our website at www.groundworkusa.org. If any questions come up, please do not hesitate to contact us. Thanks for joining us today.
Great. Thanks, everybody.